The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, painting the final streaks of muted lavender and smoky gray across the vast, cooling canvas of the sky above Oakwood, a quiet, unassuming town nestled deep in the heartland, a place where time seemed to slow just a little, allowing for a deeper, more peaceful breath. The kind of town where the hum of crickets was a more reliable clock than any digital display, where every porch light was a beacon of predictable, gentle warmth, a promise of simple safety, and the air itself carried the faint, comforting scent of damp earth and late-blooming jasmine. The last remnants of twilight were surrendering completely to the deep, enveloping blue of a moonless night, a velvety darkness that felt less like an absence of light and more like a soft, heavy blanket being carefully spread over the landscape, urging every living thing toward rest. Most of the town's inhabitants were already settling in, the day's small, predictable excitements having fully faded, leaving behind only the pleasant, dull ache of honest work and gentle living, a deep-seated readiness for stillness. On Maple Street, the old oak trees stood like silent, towering sentinels, their dense foliage absorbing the meager ambient light from the distant street lamps, creating soft, pooled shadows that moved with the faintest whisper of the evening breeze, a gentle, rhythmic dance that was less distracting than it was mesmerizing, a visual lullaby. The street itself was entirely deserted now, the last family dog having been called in hours ago, the final distant rumble of a delivery truck having long ago dissolved into the atmosphere, leaving behind a silence so complete that the tiny, almost imperceptible sound of one's own breathing became the most dominant noise in the world, a slow, steady reassurance of presence. In the small, neat two-story house at number 42, which belonged to the Peterson family, a single, warm yellow light glowed steadily from the downstairs living room, a soft, inviting square of color against the cool night, signifying not a flurry of activity, but rather the quiet ritual of preparation for sleep, a slow, deliberate winding down. Mr. Peterson, a man whose movements were as predictable and calming as the tide, was engaged in the final, nightly inspection of the house, a comforting habit he had never broken, a small, private moment of securing his domain before surrendering to rest, a gesture of quiet guardianship. He moved through the rooms with a near-perfect silence, his soft wool slippers barely disturbing the polished hardwood floors, each step a gentle thump shuffle, a faint, soothing rhythm that echoed very lightly in the stillness. In the kitchen, he checked the stove burners one last time, his fingers tracing the cool metal knobs, confirming they were all securely in the off position, a completely unnecessary but deeply satisfying act of certainty, a small mental checkmark completed. He then ensured the sink faucet was tightly closed, listening for that telltale drip, drip, drip that could break the night's peace. But tonight, there was silence. A perfect seal, the stainless steel reflecting the faint overhead light like a dark, placid pond. He paused by the back window, looking out over the small, fenced-in yard, where the silhouettes of the garden furniture and the sturdy wooden swing set were almost completely swallowed by the darkness, appearing as vague geometric shapes against the slightly lighter shade of the lawn, waiting patiently for the dawn's return, for the sun to give them dimension and purpose again. A single large moth fluttered haphazardly against the exterior glass, its tiny, insistent tap-tap-tap, a momentary, fleeting counterpoint to the deep quiet, a small, brief drama that quickly ended as the moth flew off toward the slightly brighter, more powerful pull of the distant porch light, leaving the glass once again smooth and undisturbed. Moving into the hallway, he paused by the thermostat, his eyes scanning the simple digital display, which read a perfect, comfortable 68 degrees, a temperature he had set decades ago and rarely deviated from, a constant small island of engineered comfort in the variable sea of the night air, ensuring that the house would remain cozy and unchanging until the wake-up program began its gentle, gradual upward drift many hours from now. He then made his way to the front door, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy brass deadbolt, turning it with a soft, solid thunk that resonated deeply in the stillness, a final, definitive declaration of the day's end, a firm barrier placed between the sleeping interior and the vast, indifferent exterior world. Upstairs, Mrs. Peterson was already nestled comfortably in their large quilt-covered bed, propped up slightly by two fluffy, feather-filled pillows, the soft cotton sheets cool and crisp against her skin, the heavy quilt providing a perfect insulated warmth. She was not actively reading or watching anything, but merely resting her eyes, allowing the day's impressions to slowly, gently dissipate, watching the way the outside streetlight's beam struggled to penetrate the heavy linen curtains, creating a faint, diffused, amber-colored glow on the ceiling, a slow-moving, abstract pattern that was entirely without meaning but utterly captivating in its stillness, a gentle visual focus for a mind preparing to rest. The only sound in the bedroom was the very soft, rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the antique grandfather clock that stood at the end of the hall, a sound so familiar it was no longer a sound, but rather an integral part of the quiet, the pulse of the home itself, marking the passage of time not with urgency or alarm, but with a steady, soothing predictability, a metronome for the soul, urging everything into a slower, more deliberate cadence. Occasionally, the house itself would make a tiny, quiet noise, the woods settling or contracting against the cooler night air, a brief creak or a small, almost inaudible pop from the heating ducts. Small, fleeting sounds that merely served to underscore the deeper, more profound silence that immediately followed them. Like small stones dropped into an immense, still lake, the ripples quickly dissolving back into glassiness. Down the hall in the guest bedroom, which was currently unoccupied, the silence was even deeper, more profound, undisturbed by human presence or breath. The air in there was still and cool, faintly carrying the scent of cedar and clean laundry from the stored linens. The furniture, a tall, dark mahogany dresser and a simple wooden rocking chair, standing perfectly immobile, cast into deep, solid shadows, their shapes barely distinguishable in the moonless gloom, waiting patiently for a new day or perhaps a temporary visitor, but for now merely existing as quiet, heavy presences in the dark, perfectly at rest. Mr. Peterson finally ascended the final wooden stair, the slight groan of the fourth step from the bottom, a sound he had known for 40 years, a small, gentle notification of his presence, a sound that was less an intrusion and more a familiar sign that all was well and complete. He paused at the landing, taking one last, long, slow breath, listening to the deep quiet that enveloped the house, the vast, enveloping silence that promised uninterrupted sleep, a long, deep dive into the calm unconscious. He entered the bedroom, the gentle shifting of the air a subtle cue to his wife, who opened her eyes slowly, giving him a small, quiet, knowing smile, a shared moment of nonverbal understanding that the day had ended, the vigil was over, and the time for rest had come. He moved silently to his side of the bed, the familiar, quiet rustle of his clothing as he changed into his comfortable, soft flannel pajamas, the faint, comforting smell of clean cotton filling the small space around the bedside table. He dimmed the last remaining lamp, the soft, yellow light retreating slowly, reluctantly, leaving behind only the deep, soft dark, a darkness so gentle and complete it felt like a caress. He slipped beneath the covers, the momentary coolness of the sheets quickly replaced by the radiating warmth of the mattress and the insulating thickness of the quilt, a feeling of being completely surrounded, completely contained, completely safe. He adjusted his pillow with a gentle plump, settling his head into the perfect depression, finding that exact point of maximum comfort and support, the final small physical adjustment required before surrendering. Outside, the quiet American town of Oakwood was perfectly still, its grid of streets entirely dark, its houses perfectly silent, 1,000 small engines of worry and thought slowing down, winding down, preparing for the long, quiet pause of the night. The far-off rhythmic flash of a small, distant radio tower's warning light, a steady, hypnotic blink, 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 was the only evidence of anything moving or working in the world outside the blanket of peace, a gentle, silent reminder that even in stillness, the larger world kept its own slow, predictable pace. The crickets in the tall grass by the park continued their tireless rhythmic chorus, their sound now merely a background texture, a constant, gentle pressure on the eardrums that quickly dissolved into nothingness, a white noise created by nature, a perfect counterpoint to the quiet. A very, very distant train whistle sounded, a long, low, mournful woo, a deep, vibrating sound that traveled for miles over the flat, sleeping landscape, a sound that was too far away to be alarming, but close enough to be recognized, a sound that quickly faded, its long echo retreating into the deep silence until it was gone entirely. In the Peterson house, the breathing of the two sleepers became slow, steady, and perfectly synchronized, a long, gentle inhale followed by an even longer, quieter exhale. A slow, natural rhythm taking over, the breathing of deep, restorative rest, the sound of the body finding its most comfortable, most peaceful, most quiet equilibrium. The night was vast, silent, and endless, a long, dark corridor of uninterrupted peace, a time for the mind to finally empty itself, allowing all thoughts, all worries, all plans to float away like tiny, dark seeds on a quiet, slow-moving stream, drifting further and further away until they were entirely out of sight, entirely gone, leaving only the profound, perfect stillness of the moment, the deep, warm, enveloping comfort of the quiet night, sinking slowly, gently, deeper and deeper into the calm, soft, heavy mattress of sleep, allowing the silence to fill every space, every cavity, every corner of the mind and body, a quiet so deep and so complete it became a sweet, heavy weight, a gentle, irresistible pressure pulling you down, down, down into the soft, unmoving, gentle dark. The stillness of the old oak trees, the deep, constant tick of the hallway clock, the perfect, comfortable temperature of the air, the heavy, encompassing warmth of the soft quilt, the slow, rhythmic sound of quiet breathing, all of it combined into one single, powerful, unmoving sensation of complete, utter, unshakable peace, a deep, beautiful, boring, perfect quiet that stretched out for hours and hours ahead, an immense, soft, empty expanse of absolute rest. No need to move, no need to think, no need to hear, just the deep, heavy, velvet dark and the soft, sinking pull of sleep. A quiet night in a quiet American town, perfectly, beautifully, utterly ordinary. Utterly ordinary became the defining characteristic of the night, a quietude so profound it seemed to press down on the senses, soothing them into submission, urging them to surrender completely to the dark and the still. Outside the window of the Peterson home, the streetlights cast their unwavering, pale yellow glow, each lamppost standing like a solitary sentinel guarding an empty asphalt river, the light spilling onto the manicured lawns in gentle semicircles of illumination, leaving the deepest shadows precisely at the edges of the light's reach, creating soft, hazy boundaries. The parked cars along the curb, a sensible sedan, an older pickup truck, a small, reliable hatchback, were dark, cool, metallic sculptures, their glossy surfaces reflecting the distant light sources like smoothed black river stones, each vehicle a silent testament to the daily routines that had been safely concluded hours before, waiting patiently for the ignition key and the energy of the morning. There was no sound of passing traffic, not even the faint hiss of tires on wet pavement, as the night was dry and temperate, only the faint, nearly inaudible, high-pitched hum of the electrical lines that ran silently overhead, a barely perceptible thread of energy connecting the sleeping houses, a quiet current of power that kept the refrigerator motors humming and the clocks ticking, a silent network of necessary infrastructure. The wind, which had been a gentle whisper earlier in the evening, had completely died down, leaving the leaves on the ancient oak trees entirely motionless, hanging heavily from the branches like dark silken pendants, waiting for the first breath of morning air to stir them back into life, their stillness adding an extra layer of visual weight to the profound quiet. A few blocks away, near the center of Oakwood, the small town square was also completely deserted, its worn brick pathways cool beneath the deep shadows of the century-old sycamore trees. The benches arranged around the small decorative fountain were empty, their painted slats dark and dew-dampened, inviting no one to linger in the deep quiet of the early morning hours. The fountain itself, a simple granite structure depicting a small cherub holding a fish, was not running tonight, its pump having been dutifully turned off at 10 o'clock sharp by the town maintenance crew, a small daily conservation effort, leaving the basin of water entirely still, its surface a perfect dark mirror reflecting the tiny, far-off specks of the clearest stars, providing a brief, silent glimpse of the immense, cold universe above the sheltered peace of the town. The lack of the fountain's gentle splish, splish, splish made the silence here even more noticeable, a deep, heavy, liquid quiet that seemed to soak into the very bricks of the square, holding the space in a motionless embrace. Across the square stood the Oakwood Public Library, a solid square building of reddish-brown brick, its tall, narrow windows entirely dark, concealing the countless shelves of sleeping stories and quiet information within, the knowledge contained behind those glass panes dormant until the first rays of sunlight would bring the next day's readers. Inside the library, the automatic lights that kept the main lobby illuminated for security had dimmed slightly, reducing their intensity to a very low, almost ghostly glow, a pale blue-white luminescence that barely pierced the glass, suggesting that even the light itself was conserving its energy, participating in the town's collective rest. The large clock face mounted high above the circulation desk, visible only as a dark, circular shadow from the outside, continued its slow, steady work, the minute hand imperceptibly crawling toward the hour of 3, the deepest, most quiet hour of the night, the moment when the world feels most suspended in time, halfway between yesterday and tomorrow, a perfect, unmoving pivot point of peace. In the small, modest apartment above the Oakwood General Store, located just off the square, Mrs. Gable, a widow who had lived in that exact spot for nearly 50 years, was sleeping soundly, her tiny bedroom filled with a familiar, comforting scent of lavender sachet and old, clean linen. Her window, facing the quiet secondary alleyway, was slightly ajar, just enough to let in the cool, fresh night air, allowing for a gentle cross breeze to stir the sheer white curtains with a barely perceptible, silent billow, a quiet, repetitive motion that resembled the gentle, slow breathing of a very large, peaceful animal. She lay on her side, one thin arm resting lightly beneath her cheek, her breathing shallow and steady, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest a quiet, mechanical guarantee of life and rest, her mind entirely blank and unburdened, all the small, manageable worries of the day, the price of groceries, the schedule of the local bus, the letter she needed to write tomorrow, having dissolved entirely into the soft, comforting darkness of her dreamless sleep. The town's only traffic light, situated at the intersection of Main Street and Highway 19, continued its programmed quiet operation, cycling faithfully from green to yellow to red, and back again, its powerful colored lenses projecting bright, circular pools of silent, changing light onto the empty asphalt, a dazzling yet utterly unnecessary performance for an audience of precisely zero, a perfect visual metaphor for the dependable, unceasing machinery of the mundane. The routine continuing simply because it was programmed to do so, a faithful, quiet, glowing commitment to order. The red light would hold for a long, slow count of 60 seconds, an eternity in the stillness of the night, a long, heavy pause that allowed the silence to deepen and spread, before the gentle, silent switchback to the yellow, and then the long, dark green, inviting passage that no one was there to accept, its quiet, cyclical change a visual metronome for the slowly passing time, marking the minutes with colored silence. Further out on the edge of town, where the streetlights began to thin out and the deep, silent fields of corn and soybean began, the night air was even colder, clearer, and more sharp, carrying the faint, earthy smell of turned soil and distant pine. Here, the dome of the night sky felt immense and overwhelmingly vast, filled with countless cold, diamond-point stars that sparkled with an unnerving, silent intensity, their light having traveled incomprehensible distances just to land finally on the quiet, sleeping fields of Oakwood, a profound, humbling connection between the quiet smallness of the town and the colossal, silent machinery of the universe, a link that was only truly visible during the deepest hours of the moonless night. The stillness was complete, broken only by the occasional, very soft whoosh of air as a barn owl, a large, silent hunter of the dark, flew low over a fence line, its powerful, felt-lined wings making no sound at all, its trajectory a swift, dark blur against the paler backdrop of the horizon, a momentary, silent interruption of the quiet that quickly vanished, leaving the air once again heavy and undisturbed, settling back into its deep, heavy, comforting blanket of silence. The town slept on, a perfect dark cluster of houses and shadows, entirely removed from the urgency of the world, entirely absorbed into the steady, slow, unmoving rhythm of the quiet night. A long, long period of deep, necessary, absolute rest. The dark hours dissolving slowly, gently, like sugar in warm water, moving inevitably toward the quiet, slow transition of the dawn. But for now, the deep, heavy, unchanging peace of the 3 o'clock hour prevailed, sinking the world into a perfect, quiet, deep, heavy stillness, a profound, endless moment of unmoving calm. The profound, endless moment of unmoving calm held the entire community, stretching its influence from the furthest farm boundaries to the neat, tidy blocks near the center of town, an even, consistent blanket of quiet that seemed to nullify all friction and all urgency, ensuring that every object and every soul was locked into a state of deep, undisturbed suspension. Inside the Peterson house, that quietude was internalized and magnified, the two sleepers now fully submerged in the rhythm of the night, their movements entirely minimal, their consciousness dissolved into the soft, comforting current of sleep. Mrs. Peterson shifted slightly, a gentle, almost imperceptible movement beneath the heavy quilt, turning her head on the pillow, the fine cotton making a faint, dry whisper against the softness of the fabric, a sound that was immediately swallowed by the quiet of the room, leaving no echo, no trace, merely the slightest adjustment towards even greater comfort, a silent confirmation that the rest was deep and restorative. Her hand, which had been resting lightly on the surface of the quilt, slipped down slightly, finding the cool, smooth texture of the sheet beneath, a brief sensory moment that registered nowhere in her sleeping mind, just a quiet, automatic settling into the deepest available peace, a gesture of complete, unconscious trust in the stillness surrounding her. Mr. Peterson, on his side of the bed, lay perfectly motionless, his breathing so slow and quiet that it was barely audible, yet completely steady, the soft rise and fall of his chest keeping perfect, silent time with the distant, gentle tick, tick, tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the only two consistent rhythms in the house, a comforting duality of measured time and measured life. The air in the bedroom was still, the scent of fresh laundry and old cedar from the drawers, a delicate, soothing mix, a quiet, non-invasive fragrance that contributed to the overall atmosphere of settled permanence, of reliable, unchanging comfort. The curtains remained drawn, filtering the external street light into that hazy, amber ceiling glow, which had not moved or shifted for hours, a fixed, gentle pattern that served as a visual anchor in the darkness, a soft, geometric presence that assured the sleeping mind that nothing was changing, nothing was threatening, everything was exactly as it should be, perfectly predictable. Outside, a very tiny, isolated sound occurred, a dewdrop, forming slowly on the leaf of a hydrangea bush near the window, finally grew too heavy and detached itself, falling a short distance onto a dried leaf lying on the cool earth below, making a sudden, incredibly small, sharp puck sound, a miniature event of the night, a sound that was instantly absorbed by the damp soil and the dense silence, a fleeting moment of physics that happened entirely without witness or consequence, quickly vanishing into the larger, heavy quiet. This quiet, however, was not empty, but rather filled with the texture of absence, the feeling of things resting, waiting, conserving energy. In the kitchen downstairs, the large refrigerator maintained its internal vigil, the soft, low hum of its motor running in a long, predictable cycle, a sound so constant it was functionally silent, a low-frequency vibration that merely added a subtle, grounding pressure to the deeper stillness, a technological presence that guaranteed the quiet endurance of the cold and the dark. Occasionally, after a long period of running, the motor would quietly click off, leaving behind a sudden, momentary silence so complete it was startling, a fleeting sense of suspension before the gentle, almost imperceptible creak of the internal metal walls contracting under the renewed lack of warmth would take its place. And, after a perfect, measured pause, the thrum would quietly start again, a reliable, mechanical breath in the quiet house. In the small, dimly lit utility closet off the laundry room, the water heater maintained its silent duty, its large, cylindrical tank a heavy, dark presence, its internal element occasionally kicking on with a very deep, dull thump and a brief, low, hissing sound, the sound of water being gently, efficiently warmed, a quiet domestic promise being kept in the depth of the night, a sound that was too muffled and too predictable to disturb the profound peace of the sleeping house, quickly receding into the background hum of the home. The house itself was a silent machine of comfort, all its systems operating at the lowest, most efficient register, moving heat, moving air, keeping time, all in service of the deep, undisturbed rest occurring upstairs. Out on the street again, beyond the Petersons' porch, the neighborhood settled even further into the dark hours. The houses across the road, each distinct yet unified in their quiet purpose, were equally submerged in the quiet. The Miller's house, with its large brick chimney and deep front porch, was a solid, dark mass of stillness. Only the small, faint, round glow of the security system indicator light, a tiny, steady blue pinprick on the main floor, visible in the absolute dark, a quiet, electronic heartbeat confirming its passive watchfulness. The Smith's house next door, a white clapboard structure, was so dark that it was almost invisible against the blackness of the night sky, blending entirely with the shadows of the large lilac bushes that lined its foundation, its silence absolute, a perfect picture of a world at rest. The occasional small sound that did penetrate the quiet only served to emphasize how complete the surrounding silence was. A few blocks away, near the small creek that ran through the edge of Oakwood, a lonely, persistent frog began its deep, resonant croak, 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 a repetitive, low sound that carried well over the cool, flat landscape, but was so distant and so slow in its tempo that it acted less as a disruption and more as a natural, ambient drone, a counter-melody to the silent stillness, a sound that one's mind quickly learned to ignore, integrating it into the deep texture of the night's quiet. The air inside the bedroom remained comfortably cool and fresh, the gentle movement of air from the slow-moving ceiling fan set to its lowest, silent speed, keeping a soft, imperceptible circulation that prevented the air from feeling heavy or trapped, a subtle, constant exchange of coolness and stillness. The weight of the quilt felt heavy, reassuring, a physical comfort that corresponded to the mental comfort of the deep quiet, a dual sensation of being securely held and completely unburdened, sinking further and further into the quiet, warm, heavy center of the mattress, the silence now feeling less like an external condition and more like an internal state, a complete and total stillness of mind and body, a profound, unmoving peace that offered absolute respite from the world, a deep, gentle, continuous slide into the vast, dark, comfortable abyss of dreamless rest, the minutes ticking by, unnoticed, uncounted, dissolving into the long, dark quiet of the American night, a quiet so deep it seemed to stretch into forever, holding the sleeping town in its deep, calm, silent embrace. The silent embrace of the American night grew heavier and more encompassing, a pervasive quiet that seemed to slow the very passage of time, making each minute stretch into a long, undisturbed period of suspended animation for the sleeping town of Oakwood. The moon, though currently veiled and unseen, was slowly beginning its descent towards the western horizon, its invisible movement contributing to the subtle, gradual shift in the deep nocturnal shadows, causing the patterns of darkness cast by the houses and trees to elongate and stretch, deepening the sense of mystery and unmoving stillness that dominated the landscape. Every detail outside was softened, muted, and indistinct, stripped of the sharp focus that daylight imposed, allowing the mind to wander without being tethered to specific, concrete observations, encouraging a gentle, blurred focus that was perfect for dissolving into sleep. Inside the Peterson bedroom, the deep, synchronized breathing of the couple continued its slow, steady rhythm, an internal motor of life operating at its most peaceful and efficient setting, completely divorced from conscious effort or thought. Mrs. Peterson's small, earlier adjustment was complete, and she now lay perfectly still, her face turned slightly towards the curtained window, completely lost to the deep, heavy currents of non-REM sleep, the kind of deep rest that felt like a thick, insulating shield against any external disturbance, a state of profound, restorative quiet. The pillow beneath her head felt cool and smooth, the pressure of her body against the mattress perfectly distributed, creating a sensation of weightlessness combined with comforting support, an ideal state of physical dissolution into the bedding. Mr. Peterson, too, had settled into an almost unnatural stillness, his body having found its maximum point of repose, his limbs heavy and unmoving beneath the quilt. Even the slight movement of his eyelids, which often betrayed the rapid eye movement of dreaming, was entirely absent now, indicating a mind fully withdrawn from the superficial layers of thought and imagination, sunk deep into the calm, quiet well of unconsciousness. The distant, gentle tick-tick-tick of the hallway clock seemed to slow its pace in the silence, its rhythm becoming so sparse and widely spaced that it merely marked the immense duration of the quiet, rather than the urgency of time passing, a soft, steady heartbeat for the sleeping house. Downstairs, the living room, where the warm yellow light had initially glowed, was now completely dark, the last remnant of the day's activities having been carefully extinguished. The furniture, the heavy, comfortable armchair, the long, worn sofa, the square wooden coffee table, stood like silent, dark islands in the thick gloom, their familiar shapes providing a hidden structure to the quiet room. The soft fabric of the sofa cushions, which had briefly held the warmth of human presence, was now rapidly cooling to the ambient temperature of the night air, losing the last traces of the day, becoming just another texture in the deep, enveloping darkness, a quiet return to the neutral state. On the coffee table, a stack of magazines and a single heavy ceramic coaster waited patiently, entirely unnoticed, entirely still, silent components of the deep domestic quiet, their colors and titles irrelevant in the comprehensive dark, their forms merely existing as slight interruptions in the flat surface of the table, quiet objects suspended in the long, dark pause of the night. A glass of water, left sitting beside the coaster, had grown completely still, its surface a perfect, unmoving pane of liquid, reflecting the vague, external streetlight glow with an almost invisible sheen, its contents entirely cool, its purpose dissolved until the thirsty return of the morning. The kitchen, further back in the house, was permeated by the subtle, cold scent of tile and residual cleanliness, a quiet, sterile fragrance that promised order and hygiene, a background assurance of domestic peace. The porcelain of the sink and the countertops felt cold to the touch, retaining the deepest chill of the night, a physical contrast to the engineered warmth contained within the walls. The refrigerator, having completed another cycle, remained quietly dormant, the low thrum of its motor temporarily suspended, leaving only the sound of its own deep internal stillness, a silent, powerful coldness working quietly within the deep dark. Outside, the crickets' chorus, which had been a steady, rhythmic presence earlier, had begun to thin out, the individual chirps becoming more sporadic, less intense, more reflective of a generalized tiredness, a slow, natural winding down of even the external rhythms of the night, suggesting that even the insect world was feeling the heavy, undeniable pull of the deepest hour. The far-off, rhythmic blink, blink, blink of the radio tower light continued its faithful, hypnotizing signal, too far away to cause any visual disturbance, but its silent, predictable persistence served as a quiet, comforting reminder that structure and order were maintained even in the profound absence of sound and light, a constant, steady punctuation mark on the endless page of the night sky. The heavy, profound silence of Oakwood felt like a physical pressure now, a thick, velvet weight that pressed gently on the eardrums, dissolving any stray thoughts or lingering consciousness, forcing the mind to accept the complete lack of external stimulus, encouraging a total, necessary surrender to the quiet, dark peace. Every house on Maple Street, every bedroom, every object was resting, breathing slowly, deeply, entirely unmoving, suspended in the deepest, most quiet hour before the subtle, slow first turning point of the night, the immense, powerful, silent machinery of sleep holding the entire small town in its vast, steady, continuous embrace, urging the mind deeper and deeper into the quiet, warm, unmoving center of the dark, a perfect, predictable, absolute stillness. The immense, powerful, silent machinery of sleep held the entire small town in its vast, steady, continuous embrace, urging the mind deeper and deeper into the quiet, warm, unmoving center of the dark. A perfect, predictable, absolute stillness that characterized the deepest hours before the transition towards morning could even begin to register. This was the territory of the 3:30 to 4 o'clock hour, the true nadir of the night, when the atmospheric temperature reached its coldest point and the external world was most completely withdrawn, offering a maximum contrast to the internal warmth and safety of the sleeping home. On the periphery of Oakwood, where the paved roads gave way to the narrow, unlit county lanes, the few scattered farmhouses were sunk into an even deeper level of isolation and quiet, their silhouettes barely visible against the flat, star-strewn horizon, surrounded by vast, sleeping acreage of fallow fields and quiet pastures. In the old sturdy barn belonging to the McAllister farm, a mile outside the town limits, the livestock were entirely at rest, their massive forms dark and heavy within their stalls, their breathing slow and measured, the quiet huff of a resting cow, or the occasional soft shifting of weight in the deep hay, the only sounds within the huge, shadowed wooden structure. Sounds so organic and so gentle that they were less noises and more affirmations of quiet, living presence within the deep dark. The air in the barn was thick with the warm, earthy, comforting scent of hay, dust, and animal warmth, a rich, non-invasive fragrance that spoke of deep, fundamental life processes entirely at peace, a quiet, powerful sleep taking hold of the entire ecosystem. The wooden rafters high above were dark and silent. The occasional barn swallow nest, tucked securely into a corner, held its small, sleeping occupants in a state of perfect, fluffy stillness, waiting patiently for the first glimmer of light to signal the recommencement of their swift, silent flight patterns. But for now, they were tiny, warm pockets of profound, feathery quiet. Back in the residential core of Oakwood, the absence of movement extended to the very edges of the streetscape. The few mailboxes standing by the roadside, usually bright, reflective metal structures in the daylight, were now dull, dark, geometric shapes, entirely uninteresting, entirely still, holding only the memory of the previous day's brief transaction, waiting for the silent, slow-moving hands of the pre-dawn hour to turn the clock forward toward the next delivery, standing like quiet, metallic sentinels of the domestic routine. Even the small ornamental wind chimes hanging on the porch of the house next door to the Petersons, objects designed explicitly to respond to movement, hung perfectly motionless, their thin metallic tubes entirely silent, the complete lack of air movement rendering them into passive, beautiful sculptures of quiet, their potential for delicate sound completely nullified by the deep, heavy stillness of the early morning air. This stillness was a profound, almost physical condition, a state of perfect equilibrium that settled over every surface and every object. Inside the Petersons' house, the temperature had reached its stable, comfortable low point, the thermostat maintaining the perfect regulated environment with quiet, effortless efficiency, ensuring that the heavy warmth of the bedding remained an island of constant comfort against the cooler night air, reinforcing the secure, protected feeling of being deeply and soundly asleep within unmoving walls. Mr. Peterson, in his deep state of rest, experienced a brief, subtle, entirely unconscious moment of physical repositioning, his head turning slightly on the pillow, a small, barely detectable sigh escaping his lips, a gentle release of breath that was quickly absorbed by the surrounding quiet, a minor internal tremor that did not break the surface of his deep sleep, but only served to deepen his immersion into the soft, unmoving quiet. On the floor beside the bed, Mr. Peterson's soft wool slippers sat side by side, their forms quiet and waiting, their soft, heavy soles pressing gently against the polished wood floor, objects of absolute stillness, entirely removed from the action of walking or moving, participating fully in the deep, unmoving pause of the night. The small digital clock on the bedside table, its numbers glowing a faint, steady green, was the only persistent indicator of the slow, continuous movement of time, its display fixed on 3:47 a.m., a visual representation of the depth of the quiet, the hour of maximum repose, its glow too faint to illuminate the room, merely a quiet, unintrusive confirmation of the passage of minutes within the deep dark. The cumulative effect of this deep, unwavering quietude was a profound sense of isolation and security, a feeling that the house, the street, and the entire small town were wrapped in a private, continuous bubble of peace, entirely separate from any external concerns or demands, a long, essential period of silent recuperation. The quiet was not empty, but rather rich with the absence of noise, a complete stillness that allowed the deep, slow rhythms of the body to become the only sound that truly mattered. The slow, rhythmic inhale and exhale, a gentle, continuous wave of presence in the sea of silence, pulling the mind further and further away from any residual awareness, dissolving completely into the heavy, comforting, deep, predictable, and utterly ordinary quiet of the American night, a profound, unmoving peace that offered absolute safety and endless, soft, deep rest. The profound, unmoving peace that offered absolute safety and endless, soft, deep rest now entered the transitional period between the deepest point of the night and the slow, internal preparation for the distant, eventual dawn, marking the shift from the complete withdrawal of the 3 o'clock hour toward the subtle awareness of the 4 o'clock hour, though the silence itself remained absolute and unwavering. The vast, silent plain of the night stretched ahead, holding the entire small town of Oakwood in a state of suspended animation, where even the faintest sounds seemed muffled and diffused by the sheer density of the quiet air. Outside, the heavy, cool dew continued its silent work, coating the surfaces of the street and the lawns, intensifying the earthy, cool scent that gently permeated the darkness, a fragrance of damp grass and dormant earth that was deeply soothing and non-intrusive. The shadows cast by the moonless night were now at their longest and most indistinct, stretching across the landscape like long, dark, velvet ribbons, contributing to the sense of deep, unchanging structure beneath the quiet surface. A stray, small patch of mist, formed in the low-lying hollow of the adjacent empty field, began to drift very slowly and silently, a low, pale ribbon of coolness that moved without a sound, a quiet, ephemeral presence in the deep dark, a visual representation of the air's stillness and the low temperature. In the Petersons' living room downstairs, the heavy, insulating curtains kept the external world entirely at bay, maintaining an internal environment of perfect, heavy dark. The quiet in this room was so complete that the subtle sound of dust particles settling onto the smooth surface of the coffee table felt like an imagined whisper, a theoretical sound that underscores the depth of the true silence. The television set, a large, dark rectangle against the far wall, stood entirely off, its screen a heavy, reflective mirror of the deep shadows, its internal components cooled and entirely silent, its potential for stimulation completely neutralized, a dormant vessel of visual noise that was now an essential monument to quiet. The grandfather clock in the hallway, though its tick-tick-tick was almost entirely inaudible from the upstairs bedroom, continued its steady internal rhythm, the brass pendulum swinging with a mesmerizing silent precision within its dark wooden case, a perfect, steady engine of time that did its work with quiet, relentless dependability, a reliable, mechanical heart for the sleeping home. This slow, predictable internal rhythm served as a grounding force, a constant against the vast, empty canvas of the surrounding silence, a sound that one's unconscious mind could recognize and rely upon as a sign of safety and order. Upstairs, the two sleepers remained deep in their rest. Mrs. Peterson's breathing, though soft, was robust and even, a long, continuous flow of air indicating a body deeply engaged in the work of restoration, her mind completely free of the day's obligations, entirely surrendered to the heavy comfort of the quilt and the cool, soft smoothness of the sheets. The quiet was so deep that the gentle pressure of the warm blood moving through the tiny vessels beneath her skin felt, to the highly attuned, deep listening mind, like the most profound noise in the universe, an internal, continuous shh that was the very sound of life at its most peaceful. Mr. Peterson, still unmoving, achieved a level of rest that bordered on the inanimate, his presence beside her a solid, heavy assurance of shared quiet and shared safety. The faint, steady glow of the bedside clock, now showing 4:05 a.m., indicated that the absolute depth of the night had passed, and the long, slow climb towards morning had begun, though this climb was entirely without urgency or sound, merely a slow, chronological progression within the framework of the continuous, profound peace. The deep quiet was a gift of the small, safe American town, a place where the noise of the world was entirely excluded by the sheer force of domestic predictability and shared communal stillness, allowing the heavy, unburdened silence to sink deeper and deeper into the mind, pulling every nerve and every muscle into a state of absolute, peaceful, unmoving repose, dissolving into the complete, comfortable darkness wrapped securely in the endless, ordinary, quiet night. The quiet, dark peace continued its long, slow hold, stretching now into the hours approaching the final, deep segment of the night, moving towards the 4:30 hour, a time when the world feels most deeply asleep and most resistant to waking, yet subtly beginning the long, internal preparation for the distant, eventual dawn. The air outside the houses was at its absolute coolest, the dew point reached, causing a fine, invisible mist to settle gently upon the grass and the metallic surfaces of the parked cars. A silent, cool coating that added a layer of profound stillness and moisture to the sleeping world, ensuring that any sound that did occur would be immediately muffled and absorbed. Within the Peterson home, the deep silence was palpable, a dense, rich texture that filled every corner and closed space, making the very fabric of the house feel protective and quiet. Upstairs, Mrs. Peterson stirred again, a slow, gentle, almost liquid movement of her body turning onto her other side, finding a new point of equilibrium, the heavy layers of the quilt shifting slightly with a faint, low whoosh of air displacement, a sound so soft it existed only in the immediate vicinity of the bed, a minor, necessary adjustment made entirely by the sleeping body without conscious command, a natural seeking of deeper comfort in the long, dark quiet. Her breathing, which had been perfectly synchronized with her husband's, momentarily shifted its pace, becoming slightly shallower and then slowing again, finding a new, equally steady rhythm that was entirely peaceful and unforced, the rhythm of deep, essential rest. Mr. Peterson remained perfectly still, a heavy, unmoving presence beside her, his sleep absolute and dreamless, his features softened and relaxed in the darkness, all the tension and slate lines of the day's responsibilities completely smoothed away by the profound quiet of the night. His hand, resting near the edge of the mattress, was cool, its position unchanged for hours, a testament to the depth of his repose. The only movement near him was the almost imperceptible, slow flow of the air conditioning vent set low in the wall, gently pushing a continuous, regulated stream of cool air into the room, maintaining the constant, perfect temperature that supported their uninterrupted sleep, the very mechanism of comfort operating silently in the deep dark. Downstairs, the quiet extended its reign over the utilitarian spaces of the home. In the small laundry room, the neatly stacked piles of clean towels and folded sheets were heavy and still, their cotton and linen fibers cool and soft, emitting the faint, fresh scent of fabric softener, a clean, gentle aroma that permeated the quiet space. The washing machine and dryer, large metallic appliances, stood like silent, futuristic monuments in the deep shadows, their internal drums empty and motionless, their complicated wiring and mechanisms entirely dormant, their potential for noise entirely neutralized, existing solely as dark, heavy, quiet shapes in the continuous gloom, waiting for the active energy of the morning. Outside, the streetlights continued their steady, silent vigil, casting their pale, unchanging pools of yellow light onto the asphalt and the dew-laden grass, their glow providing the only contrast to the overwhelming blackness of the sky above, a steady, predictable source of passive, non-intrusive illumination. A gentle, quiet sound occurred a block away, the town's automatic sprinkler system maintaining the small patch of municipal flowers near the corner sign, briefly and silently activated, sending a fine, almost unheard mist hiss of water into the air, a soft, localized shower that lasted only a minute before the quiet click of the valves shutting off returned the immediate area to the absolute silence of the deep night, leaving behind only the scent of cool, damped earth and fresh water, a fleeting, necessary, and very quiet act of maintenance that quickly disappeared into the vast, heavy quiet. The grandfather clock in the hallway below was preparing for its final hourly chime before the very earliest hints of dawn, its internal mechanisms slowly winding up with an almost inaudible whir and a gentle catch, a quiet internal preparation for the slow, measured sequence of deep, resonant bongs that would briefly punctuate the profound silence of the hour. A sound that was so familiar, so expected, and so much a part of the quiet, established order of the house that it would penetrate the sleeper's consciousness not as an alarm, but as a deep, comforting confirmation of time's reliable passage and the continuing, unmoving safety of the night. The entire sleeping town was suspended in this deep, unchanging period, a vast, silent reservoir of rest, every single light out, every single sound muffled, every single anxiety put aside, the heavy, velvet dark of the night acting as a profound, continuous embrace, pulling every molecule of the world deeper into the quiet, warm, unmoving center of absolute peace. A perfect, predictable, unending stillness that was the ultimate balm to the mind and the body, sinking completely into the quiet, soft, heavy mattress of sleep, allowing the continuous silence to stretch out ahead like an endless dark plain, entirely safe, entirely peaceful, entirely still. The entire sleeping town remained suspended in this deep, unchanging period, a vast, silent reservoir of rest, as the grandfather clock's deep, resonant bongs marked the 4 o'clock hour, the sound vibrating gently through the quiet house, but doing nothing to disturb the profound stillness of the bedroom upstairs, merely confirming the passage of time without demanding attention or action. The sound faded slowly, the long, heavy vibration dissolving entirely into the dense quiet of the hallways and the thick curtains, leaving behind an even deeper sense of peace, a quiet that had been momentarily measured and then released back into its continuous, unending form. This was the hour when the internal processes of the house and the natural world began their very slow, almost imperceptible shift, the first subtle, silent turn away from the nadir of the night towards the inevitable, distant light of morning. Out on the street, the distant, rhythmic flash of the radio tower light continued its silent, predictable signal, but now a new, extremely subtle phenomenon began to occur on the far eastern horizon, visible only if one were looking out across the open fields outside the town. The deep, absolute black of the sky began to lose its perfect intensity, shifting to the faintest, darkest shade of charcoal gray, a minuscule, gradual dilution of the darkness that was entirely imperceptible from within the sheltered core of Oakwood, a silent, cosmic indication that the sun, still far below the earth, was beginning its long, slow ascent towards visibility. This faint, hidden lightning was the first quiet promise of the coming day, a biological cue that would eventually, hours later, trigger the waking mechanisms of birds and people alike, but for now, it remained a secret held only by the furthest edge of the horizon and the deepest part of the sleeping mind. In the Peterson bedroom, the sleepers remained deeply at rest, their synchronized, slow breathing the quiet, steady anchor of the room. Mr. Peterson, still unmoving, was so deeply submerged in sleep that his mind had completely ceased its conscious operations, existing only in a state of quiet, regenerative vacancy, a perfect, essential pause. Mrs. Peterson, having made her earlier adjustment, was equally still, her body absorbing the profound quiet and converting it into physical and mental rest, a highly efficient, necessary hibernation. The faint, steady glow of the digital clock beside the bed now read 4:18 a.m., each minute a quiet electronic step further into the final stage of the deep night, a number that quietly confirmed the successful completion of the longest, most quiet hours. Downstairs, the kitchen began its own quiet internal adjustment. The refrigerator motor, which had been silent for a long period, quietly clicked on again with a low, almost subsonic thrum, the sound barely a vibration in the quiet foundation of the house, a brief, mechanical affirmation of its duty to maintain the cold, a sound that was immediately integrated into the deep background texture of the home's silence. This gentle, renewed hum was a sign of necessary automatic functioning, entirely predictable and therefore entirely non-disruptive, a guarantee of continued order within the deep quiet. The house's heating system, pre-programmed for a slight, anticipatory upward temperature shift well before the morning alarm, began its slow, subtle increase, the fan moving the newly warmed air through the vents with a barely audible, very low sigh, a soft movement of air that gently circulated the warmth without creating any noticeable draft or sound, ensuring that the transition from the coldest part of the night to the necessary warmth of the morning would be seamless and entirely unnoticed by the sleeping occupants, a quiet, gradual preparation for the return of activity. The silence outside was now so profound that even the distant, sporadic croak of the lonely creek frog seemed to have ceased entirely, leaving the night air empty of anything but the subtle, damp, earthy fragrance of the cooling ground. The wind chimes next door remained perfectly motionless, dark and silent against the increasing stillness of the air, objects of perfect, unmoving quiet. The heavy, dark presence of the old oak trees outside the window absorbed the deep silence, their massive trunks and dense, still foliage acting as natural sound dampeners, enclosing the neighborhood in a pocket of continuous, protected quiet, a dark, heavy, quiet shell. The sleeping mind, sensing this continuous, enveloping quiet, relaxed its final defenses, allowing itself to sink completely and totally into the unmoving peace, the heavy, soft feeling of the bedding and the complete, non-existent urgency of the dark night combining into a perfect, irresistible invitation to deeper rest, dissolving further and further into the sweet, comforting, predictable quiet of the enduring, ordinary American night, a long, continuous stretch of absolute, unmoving, heavy peace. The long, continuous stretch of absolute, unmoving, heavy peace held the town firmly in its grasp, and as the clock moved closer to the 5 o'clock hour, the quiet reached a plateau of sustained, deep stillness that felt both endless and entirely comforting, a perfect stasis that was the very essence of deep, restorative rest. The faint, hidden lightning on the eastern horizon was beginning its incredibly slow, gradual encroachment, subtly altering the deep texture of the night sky from absolute black to a softer, almost imperceptible shade of midnight blue, a change that was still too minimal to create any noticeable light within the streets of Oakwood, but represented the quiet, continuous turning of the cosmic machinery toward the inevitable morning. Inside the quiet house, the pre-programmed gentle rise in the internal temperature continued its silent work, ensuring that the air remained perfectly comfortable, neither too cold nor too warm, maintaining the ideal environment for uninterrupted sleep. This quiet efficiency was a hallmark of the small, ordinary night, where every necessary function occurred without noise, without urgency, and entirely out of sight, all resources dedicated to supporting the profound rest of the occupants. Upstairs, Mr. Peterson shifted slightly again, a brief, minor adjustment of his position, not fully turning over, but merely settling his weight more completely into the deep softness of the mattress, the movement accompanied by a very low, gentle shush sound from the sheets, a sound immediately swallowed by the density of the quiet air, leaving no echo or disturbance, merely a settling into deeper, more complete repose. He was now entering a long, quiet stretch of deep wave sleep, the state of maximum bodily repair, where the mind was utterly disconnected from the superficial world, existing only in a state of profound internal silence. Mrs. Peterson, next to him, mirrored this deep state of stillness, her hands resting lightly and loosely atop the quilt, their position entirely relaxed, her breathing so steady and shallow that it contributed only the faintest continuous puff of air to the quiet atmosphere, a nearly perfect synchronization with the surrounding peace. The scent in the room remained that delicate, soothing mix of clean laundry and cool, still air, a non-invasive olfactory anchor to the quiet domestic safety. Downstairs, the quiet extended into the small, rarely used formal dining room, a room typically reserved for holiday meals or special gatherings, and thus its quietness was profound and deep. The heavy wooden dining table, highly polished and dark, stood perfectly still in the gloom, reflecting the faint, hazy amber light that bled in from the distant living room hallway, its surface a vast, dark mirror of stillness. The 6 matching chairs were tucked neatly beneath the table, their cushioned seats cool and empty, their presence adding to the sense of heavy, structured repose that defined the quiet architecture of the home. On the mahogany sideboard, a set of crystal glasses stood entirely motionless, catching the barest hint of the diffused light, their smooth, intricate surfaces utterly silent, their potential for delicate chime entirely negated by the absolute lack of air movement, existing only as dark, beautiful, silent forms in the deep, continuous dark. The stillness outside was so absolute that the occasional movement of a small nocturnal creature became the only event. A small field mouse, making its way stealthily along the perimeter of the backyard fence outside, produced the quietest, most fleeting rustle-rustle sound as it passed through a small patch of dried leaves, a sound that was instantly absorbed by the damp soil and the thick silence of the dew-laden air, a momentary, quiet drama of the natural world that occurred entirely without human witness, vanishing immediately back into the comprehensive peace. The street itself remained entirely empty and quiet, the long, dark stretch of asphalt reflecting the unwavering glow of the distant streetlights. The parked cars were now slightly wet with the heaviest condensation of the night, their metal surfaces gleaming dully in the non-intrusive light. Objects of heavy, quiet stillness, each one a dark, metallic repository of the day's journey, now resting completely and fully until the ignition key of the morning demanded their return to motion. The entire scene was one of overwhelming, sustained predictability and peace, a portrait of a world at its most tranquil and unmoving, a quiet perfection achieved only in the deepest, most ordinary hours of the night. This continuous, unwavering quiet acted as a powerful, gentle pull, urging the mind deeper into the soft, unmoving center of rest, dissolving any lingering remnants of sensation or thought, allowing the body to feel heavy, safe, and completely unburdened, sinking further and further into the continuous, absolute stillness of the ordinary American night. A profound, continuous, unmoving quiet that stretched out, perfectly safe, perfectly predictable, and perfectly silent, holding the entire world in its deep, heavy, velvet embrace. The deep, heavy, velvet embrace of the continuous quiet tightened its hold as the night entered its final, longest stage of perfect repose, the clock approaching 4:45 a.m., a time when the first signs of pre-dawn activity should technically begin, but in the profoundly peaceful environment of Oakwood, the prevailing force remained absolute, unmoving stillness. The subtle lightening on the eastern horizon had progressed slightly, causing the deepest shadows to lose their pure blackness and become infused with an almost imperceptible indigo hue, a silent, slow shift in the atmosphere's coloration that was utterly non-threatening and non-stimulating, merely an indication of the immense, gradual turning of the planet. Inside the Peterson bedroom, the deep quiet was a rich, continuous drone of silence, broken only by the necessary biological rhythms of the two sleepers, whose breathing remained slow, deep, and perfectly synchronized, a long, continuous inhale followed by an even longer, quieter exhale, the sound of deep, restorative life operating entirely at peace. Mrs. Peterson's face, turned slightly towards the curtained window, was entirely relaxed, her mind fully immersed in the dreamless, quiet void of deep sleep, her body heavy and entirely unconcerned with the world outside the comfortable boundaries of the bed and the quilt, existing solely in a state of absolute, effortless repose. Mr. Peterson, still motionless, lay beside her, the weight of the heavy flannel pajamas and the thick quilt combining to create a sensation of being perfectly sealed off and protected from the cool air and any potential disturbance. The small digital clock, glowing its faint, steady green, now showed 4:47 a.m., a predictable, unchanging number that confirmed the successful, quiet passage of another long stretch of time within the deep, continuous dark. The gentle, silent flow of the conditioned air continued, a subtle, cool pressure in the room, maintaining the perfect atmospheric balance that supported their profound rest, the quiet machinery of domestic comfort working tirelessly and silently beneath the surface of the sleep. Downstairs, the quiet extended its domain into the small, rarely entered basement, a space typically sealed off by a heavy, closed wooden door. Here, the silence was even deeper, colder and more profound, filled with the faint, earthy scent of concrete and stored wood. The low, distant hum of the household's water pump, a small, essential motor located near the main pipe, occasionally cycled on for a few quiet seconds with a gentle, muffled thrumming sound, a brief, necessary act of pressure maintenance, a noise so deep and so brief that it was instantly absorbed by the concrete walls and the dense silence of the basement air, a hidden process confirming the quiet internal order of the house. The utility area in the basement, where tools hung neatly on pegboards and old paint cans sat stacked on shelves, was a study in profound stillness. Each object, from the heavy claw hammer to the coiled electrical cords, was perfectly motionless, cast into deep, permanent shadows, their forms dark and silent, entirely removed from any active purpose, participating completely in the deep, unmoving pause of the early morning hours. The only other sound, barely perceptible even down here, was the slow, soft drip of condensation forming and falling within the main ventilation pipe, a sporadic, quiet pock against the metal, a tiny, isolated sound that was immediately swallowed by the cold, heavy quiet, a small, fleeting punctuation mark in the vast, continuous silence. Outside the house, the neighborhood was entering its most absolute stage of non-activity. Even the distant, sporadic sounds of the nocturnal animals seemed to have finally ceased, leaving the air entirely empty and still. The houses across the street remained dark and silent, their windows reflecting the faint, non-committal indigo of the high atmosphere, heavy cubes of sleeping domesticity. The streetlights continued their quiet, dependable glow, illuminating the dew-laden pavement and the motionless leaves of the oak trees, providing a stable, visual assurance of order in the deep, continuous dark. The cumulative effect of the sustained, absolute quiet was an overwhelming sense of secure enclosure and deep, effortless peace, a feeling that the world outside had been completely muffled and held at bay, leaving only the internal, heavy comfort of the bedding and the steady, gentle rhythm of one's own breathing. The profound, continuous silence acted as a gentle, irresistible current, pulling the mind further and further away from any lingering surface thoughts, ensuring a deep, final descent into the quiet, unmoving center of absolute rest, dissolving into the complete, warm, heavy comfort of the ordinary, predictable American night. A long, quiet, endless stretch of deep, unmoving, perfect peace. The profound, continuous, unmoving quiet of the ordinary American night held steady, stretching into the silent prelude to dawn, the clock advancing toward 5 a.m., the final hour of absolute, deep stillness before the first, faint, tentative sounds of the approaching morning could even begin to organize themselves. The entire town of Oakwood was submerged in this heavy, peaceful quiet, every window dark, every street deserted, the collective exhaustion of the community resolved into a shared, deep, restorative repose, a blanket of silence that felt ancient and complete. The eastern sky had now transitioned into a very subtle, pale shade of steel gray, the faintest indication that the distant sun was indeed rising beneath the curvature of the earth, an invisible pressure pushing against the darkness. This minimal change in light was not enough to penetrate the drawn curtains of the Peterson home, but it did soften the intense blackness of the outside world, creating a gentler, more forgiving dark, a silent signal that the long vigil of the night was nearing its inevitable quiet conclusion. In the bedroom upstairs, the environment remained one of perfect, deep stillness. The temperature was stable, the air soft, and the darkness absolute. Mr. Peterson, in his deep wave sleep, exhibited only the slowest, most minute movements of respiration, his body functioning at its most peaceful and efficient register, entirely enveloped by the deep, insulating quiet of the room. Mrs. Peterson lay entirely unmoving beside him, her entire being surrendered to the heavy comfort of the cool sheets and the warm quilt, the gentle, rhythmic pulse of her breathing now so soft it was almost entirely an internal sensation, entirely absorbed by the thickness of the surrounding silence, a sound of life perfectly integrated into the absolute peace. The small, faint green glow of the bedside clock now displayed 4:53 a.m., a predictable, sequential step forward in time, its numbers a silent, continuous confirmation of the long, quiet passage of the night, a gentle visual anchor in the deep, unmoving dark. On the small wooden dressing table across the room, a large, dark glass bottle of simple hand lotion stood perfectly motionless, its cap secured, its smooth surface reflecting the faint, hazy light that bled in from the hallway under the door, an object of quiet domesticity entirely at rest, its cool weight pressing gently against the wooden surface, a silent presence in the deep gloom. Downstairs, the quiet extended to the rarely opened front coat closet, a small, dark space where the clothing hung entirely still, heavy wool coats and light jackets suspended from wooden hangers, their fabric entirely unmoving, their pockets containing nothing but quiet emptiness, their folds and textures entirely lost in the deep, heavy shadows, emitting the faint, dry scent of wool and stored linen, a quiet, non-invasive fragrance of order and readiness for the day ahead, a space of absolute, suspended repose. Even the objects outside the house participated in this deep stillness. The bird feeder, hanging from a thin wire in the Petersons' backyard, was perfectly motionless, the small plastic dome and the wooden perches entirely untouched by the wind, the dry bird seed inside entirely still, a silent, empty structure patiently waiting for the first tentative chirp of the earliest morning sparrows. The garden hose, coiled neatly near the back spigot, was dark and cool, its rubber surface damp with the night's condensation, its curved form a heavy, silent presence on the damp earth, a vessel of quiet water entirely at rest, its purpose dissolved until the heat of the morning demanded its use. The quiet was now so complete that the only discernible sound was the deep shh of the central air system, which was now maintaining a steady, low warmth, a non-intrusive sound that the sleeping mind had long ago categorized as part of the silence itself, a baseline hum of comfort and security. The entire environment was dedicated to a single, continuous purpose, the maintenance of deep, unmoving rest. This sustained, continuous peace felt like a warm, heavy blanket being pulled higher and tighter around the shoulders, pulling the last threads of awareness out of the mind, ensuring a complete and total surrender to the deep, silent comfort of the bedding, dissolving completely into the smooth, dark, endless flow of the ordinary, predictable American night, sinking deeper and deeper into the ultimate, unmoving stillness. Sinking deeper and deeper into the ultimate unmoving stillness, the entire town of Oakwood was held in the final, profound moments of absolute nocturnal quiet, the time when rest is at its deepest and most restorative, precisely as the digital clock on the bedside table transitioned to 5 a.m., a silent, numerical confirmation that the long, dark, quiet night was entering its final, graceful, slow transition toward the first signs of dawn. The faint indigo of the eastern horizon was now becoming a shade of soft, muted violet, a gentle, hidden color change that promised the return of light without yet delivering its intensity, a subtle atmospheric softening that still did nothing to break the heavy peace of the protected interior. In the Peterson bedroom, the deep stillness was profound and absolute, the air entirely motionless, the darkness heavy and comforting. The two sleepers were perfectly still, their deep, synchronized breathing continuing its slow, steady rhythm, a gentle, continuous wave of presence in the sea of silence, their bodies heavy and unburdened by any residual tension or worry. Mrs. Peterson's final, subtle movements of the night had ceased, and she rested entirely flat and open, her energy conserved, her mind in a state of perfect, peaceful vacancy, completely suspended in the deep quiet. Mr. Peterson, beside her, remained a heavy, unmoving form, utterly surrendered to the essential restorative power of the deep night, wrapped completely in the security of the bedding and the walls. The house began its own quiet, final, anticipatory movements. The thermostat, completing its pre-programmed warming sequence, ensured the air was perfectly temperate, and the low, subtle sigh of the circulating air fan was the only mechanical sound in the immediate vicinity, a constant, gentle reassurance of managed comfort. Downstairs, the refrigerator motor quietly clicked off again, having completed its cycle, leaving behind a brief, momentary sense of increased stillness, an internal pause that quickly melted back into the deep, heavy silence of the kitchen, confirming the continued order of the domestic world. Outside, the quiet was just beginning to be challenged by the very earliest, most tentative stirrings of the diurnal world, sounds that were still too distant and too faint to be anything other than a soft, barely perceptible texture on the periphery of hearing. A single, very far-off robin, its internal clock, the first to register the hidden violet light of the atmosphere, emitted one or two short, quiet chirps, sounds that were so sparse and so distant they were swallowed almost immediately by the vastness of the quiet air. A tiny, fleeting, failed attempt to break the deep silence, a sound that quickly dissolved into nothingness. The single, distant sound served only to underscore the overwhelming power of the silence that still dominated the neighborhood. The streetlights, which had held their unwavering pale yellow glow all night, remained on, performing their final hour of duty, illuminating the motionless cars and the dew-heavy leaves, creating a tableau of unmoving, quiet perfection. The entire town of Oakwood was held in this perfect final moment, a collective pause of profound stillness and peace, the cumulative effect of hours of deep, undisturbed quiet achieving its maximum influence. The heavy, warm comfort of the bedding, the predictable, steady tick of the distant clock, the unwavering dark, and the continuous, encompassing silence combined into a single, overwhelming sensation of absolute safety and peace. This ultimate quietude was the perfect endpoint of the long, ordinary night, a complete surrender to the deepest available rest, dissolving completely and entirely into the vast, warm, heavy, unmoving, and perfectly silent space of deep, continuous sleep, sinking effortlessly, finally, and completely into the soft, velvet dark, holding on to nothing but the profound, unshakable peace of the quiet American night, a continuous, perfect, absolute stillness that stretches out endlessly, without end or demand, just deep, gentle, continuous rest.